Important notice. The narration in this video is generated by artificial intelligence. The script is an original creation and not an actual recording. It dramatizes the thinking of Richard Feynman, based on his works, to clearly explore his ideas. Have you ever looked at someone like Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, or Richard Feynman and thought, they're from another species? The word genius comes almost instinctively. We use it to describe a mind that operates on such a high plane that it seems fundamentally different from our own. It's an idea that is both comforting and paralyzing. Comforting because it absolves us. If they were born with a magical brain, then it's not our fault that we can't understand general relativity. And paralyzing because it creates an insurmountable barrier between them and us, stifling our own ambition before it even has a chance to breathe. We believe in the myth of genius, the notion that certain people are graced with an innate and supernatural intelligence, a divine gift that explains their achievements. This belief is so ingrained in our culture that we rarely question it, accepting it as a fact of life. But what if it's the most demotivating lie we've ever been told? What if genius isn't an innate quality, but the result of a process? What if the tools they used are actually available to all of us, waiting to be picked up and used? The idea that genius is a hoax was a deep-seated conviction of one of the men most often labeled as such, Richard Feynman. He despised the word and considered it an excuse for intellectual laziness, a useless label that obscured the real work behind discovery. The promise of our channel, The Myth Destroyer, is to dismantle the ideas that limit us, and the myth of genius is perhaps the greatest and most subtle of all. Today, we will use Feynman's own life and method to debunk this notion of innate intelligence once and for all. We won't just say that genius doesn't exist. We'll open his mental toolbox and reveal the process of hard work, relentless curiosity, and serious play that lay behind his discoveries. By the end of this video, you will understand that genius is not a noun describing a person, but a verb describing a process. It's a process that can be learned and cultivated, and the only thing preventing you from using it is the belief that you were born without it. To understand Feynman's aversion to the label of genius, we need to look at his own background, which wasn't that of a divine burst of intelligence, but rather that of a curious boy who loved to take things apart. In his youth, he became famous in his neighborhood for fixing radios. While other boys played soccer, Feynman was in his room, surrounded by circuit diagrams, trying to understand how sound could travel through the air and materialize in his speaker. The crucial point here is that nobody gave him a manual on how to be a radio genius. He learned by trial and error. He developed a feeling, an intuition about how electrons behaved, blowing fuses, getting small shocks, and spending frustrating hours hunting for the fault. This hands-on, messy experience, not an innate ability, forged the cornerstone of his lifelong method, learning by doing, playing, tinkering with the problem until he understood it on a visceral level, an understanding that no textbook could provide in isolation. This serious play approach and hands-on learning set Feynman apart from many of his peers throughout his life. While other physicists might be content to manipulate equations, treating physics as an exercise in abstract mathematics, Feynman needed to see what was happening. He needed to have a physical model, a picture in his head. His famous Feynman diagrams, which revolutionized particle physics by providing an intuitive way to visualize complex subatomic interactions, didn't emerge from superior mathematics, but from scribbles and drawings, an attempt to see the dance of particles. He treated physics problems not as solemn and daunting tasks, but as fascinating puzzles, toys for his mind. This playful attitude with ideas allowed him to approach them from unexpected angles, free from the rigidity of formal thought that imprisoned many others. He wasn't trying to be a genius. He was simply having profound fun, and it was this pursuit of enjoyment that led him to brilliant insights. The intellectual enemy that Feynman fought against, therefore, was the paralyzing reverence for genius and the idea that science is done by superhumans with special brains. This notion, for him, was the antithesis of his philosophy. He saw science as a skill that anyone could learn, like carpentry or cooking. It requires practice, dedication, and the right tools, but it doesn't require a magical brain. The myth of genius, in his view, was deeply harmful for two main reasons. First, it discourages ordinary people from trying to solve difficult problems, as they convince themselves that they don't have the necessary gift, giving up before they even begin. Second, it places scientists themselves on a dangerous pedestal, transforming them into figures of unquestionable authority instead of fallible and human explorers. Feynman wanted to demystify science, bring it back down to earth, and show it as it really is, a human, messy, often frustrating but accessible process of trying to understand the world. The weapon Feynman used instead of supposed innate genius was actually a mental toolbox, an arsenal of problem-solving approaches he had built up over his lifetime. It wasn't a single magic technique, but a collection of work habits and mental attitudes. The first tool, and the most underestimated, was simply hard, focused work. He was famous for his ability to concentrate intensely on a problem for hours on end, a practice he called putting his nose to the whetstone. But hard work alone wasn't enough. Frustration came from seeing intelligent people working hard on the wrong problems or in the wrong way. He needed a system to ensure his effort was productive. It was this need to transform hard work into real progress that led him to formalize the other tools in his arsenal. One of the most crucial tools in his toolbox was the one he used to develop the Feynman technique of learning, the insistence on retranslating any complex idea into his own simple terms. He refused to use an equation unless he understood what each part of it physically meant. Another powerful tool was what he called his 12 favorite problems. He kept a list of a dozen fundamental open problems in physics that he found most interesting. Whenever he learned a new technique, a new mathematical trick, or a new idea in a lecture, he immediately tested it against these 12 problems. He would ask himself, could this help me solve any of them? This transformed passive learning into an active hunt for solutions, ensuring that all new knowledge was immediately put to the practical test. This system ensured his mind was always primed for discovery. The mechanics of his approach combined these tools in a non-linear exploratory process. Step 1 was to choose a truly interesting problem, something that genuinely fascinated him, as passion was the fuel for persistence. Step 2 was to try to solve it with the tools he already possessed and inevitably fail. Step 3, the key step, was not to give up, but to start playing. He approached the problem from all angles. What if I try an extremely simple case? What if I make an analogy with a problem I've already solved? What if the answer is the opposite of what I expect? Step 4 was to go and learn something new, often in a seemingly unrelated area, knowing that the solution often comes from an unexpected connection. Finally, step 5 was to apply this new idea back to the problem. This weapon was not a spear designed for a single blow, but a Swiss Army knife, full of small blades, useful for cutting a problem into pieces and examining it from all sides. Let's paint a picture of the conflict setting: the Cornell University cafeteria in the 1940s. It's lunchtime and the room is filled with some of the world's brightest physicists, many of whom would later work with Feynman on the Manhattan Project. The air is thick with conversation about theoretical physics. Hans Bethe, a giant of physics and future Nobel laureate, is there. The atmosphere is competitive yet collaborative. They are all grappling with the toughest problems of the time, trying to understand the forces that hold the universe together. The atmosphere is one of intense intellectual concentration. In the midst of this pantheon of giants is the young Richard Feynman, relatively unknown but already gaining a reputation for his quick mind and unconventional approach. He is not intimidated by the great reputations around him. He is simply excited to be in a place where he can play with the best minds in the world. The problem at hand is a challenge that arises in the middle of the cafeteria. Someone throws a plate into the air. The plate has a red university emblem on it. As the plate spins and oscillates in the air, Feynman notices something curious. The red emblem spins faster than the plate oscillates. He found this interesting. Instead of dismissing it as a trivial curiosity, his playful and curious mind fixated on the problem. The other physicists may have noticed, but dismissed it as irrelevant to their serious work on nuclear physics. They were focused on the big problems, while Feynman allowed himself to be captivated by a small problem that sparked his curiosity. The reasoning of others was focused and disciplined. Feynman's was open and opportunistic. Feynman's perspective is completely different. He doesn't see a plate, but a system of rotating rigid bodies. He sees the equations of motion coming to life. He goes to his room and starts playing with the equations that describe the rotation and oscillation. He's not trying to solve an important problem. He's just having fun, following his curiosity. He starts calculating the relationship between the rotational speed and the oscillatory speed. It's a difficult problem, but for him, it's a game. He doesn't care if the answer is useful, he just wants to understand what he saw. His patience is not that of a hard worker, but that of a child absorbed in a new and fascinating toy. He identifies the fundamental flaw in the thinking of others. They confused important with interesting. The tension in the scene is not one of conflict, but of solitary discovery. Hans Bethe enters Feynman's room and asks him what he is doing, perhaps a little impatient that he is wasting time with spinning plates when there are more pressing problems to be solved. Feynman, excited, tries to explain what he has discovered about the equations of rotational motion. Bethe, initially skeptical, begins to listen. Feynman is not being aggressive. He is overflowing with the joy of discovery, the pure delight of having solved a puzzle he set for himself. His intervention is not a challenge, but a contagious invitation to share his joy. The climax is the unexpected connection. As Feynman explains his equations to Bethe, he realizes that the same mathematics that describes the rotation of a wobbly plate is remarkably similar to the mathematics that describes the orbit of electrons in an atom under quantum electrodynamics, a problem he was working on. The playing with the plate gave him a new tool, a new way of thinking about a problem in particle physics. What began as a distraction became the key. The application of his weapon, the freedom to follow his curiosity and to play with useless problems, led to a breakthrough in his serious work. He would not have arrived at this insight if he had been following a linear and efficient path. The result is a profound lesson for Bethe and for Feynman himself. Genius is not a bolt from the blue. It is the product of relentless curiosity, a prepared mind, and the courage to waste time on interesting things. The collapse is not of anyone's authority, but of the idea that great discoveries come only from work focused on big problems. Feynman proved, to himself and to others, that the path to discovery is often indirect and unexpected. His work on plate wobble ended up contributing to the ideas that would earn him the Nobel Prize. The playfulness was not a distraction from serious work. It was an essential part of it. This story illustrates Feynman's central philosophy about work and knowledge. He believed that the true engine of discovery was not intelligence, but curiosity and the pleasure of discovering things. He summarized this attitude in one of his most personal and famous reflections. The context was explaining why he did science, what motivated him beyond any practical application. Physics is like sex. Sure, it can yield some practical results, but that's not why we do it. What he is saying here, in his irreverent and brilliant way, is that intrinsic motivation, the pure pleasure of the act of discovering, is the most powerful force. Geniuses are not people who are born intelligent. They are people who are so passionate about a subject that they can't stop playing with it. It is this playful obsession, and not a genetic gift, that leads to extraordinary results. So how can we apply this and build our own mental toolbox? The first step, and the most crucial, is to abandon the idea that you are bad at something. Instead, assume that you simply don't have the right tools or the correct approach yet. The second step is to actively cultivate serious play. Choose a problem and instead of trying to solve it head-on, ask yourself, what's the silliest or weirdest way to think about this? Draw it, build a physical model, explain it to a child. The third step is to diversify your knowledge. Read about subjects that have nothing to do with your field. The solution to your problem may be hidden in biology, history, or music. Feynman was a fervent believer in the power of hard work and persistence, and he had no patience for the idea of effortless genius. He once told a frustrated student, "No, you don't need to be a genius. I was an ordinary person who studied hard." Take this seriously. The secret is that there is no secret. It's work, but work driven by passion and playfulness. The final lesson is about humility. The myth of genius is a form of arrogance. both for those who call themselves geniuses and for those who use it as an excuse. Feynman's approach is fundamentally humble. It's the admission that we don't know the answers and that the only way to find them is through persistent and often erratic exploration. He teaches us to respect the process, value small insights, and be open to unexpected connections. True intelligence is not knowing all the answers, but having the curiosity to ask the questions and the tenacity to pursue them, no matter how trivial they may seem at first. The universe is full of secrets hidden in ordinary places, like a spinning plate, waiting for a mind playful enough to notice them. The myth of the genius is socially dangerous. It creates a culture of intellectual passivity. If only geniuses can have great ideas, then the rest of us are relegated to being mere spectators. This affects how we teach our children, how we run our businesses, and how we approach society's most difficult problems. We wait for a savior genius to appear to solve climate change or cure cancer, instead of realizing that the solution will likely come from the collaborative and persistent work of thousands of dedicated ordinary people. Debunking the myth of the genius is an act of democratic empowerment. It's about reclaiming our right to participate in the great adventure of solving problems, no matter how big or small. It's about understanding that each of us has the potential for significant contributions, and that curiosity is a far more powerful force than IQ. Feynman's toolbox is yours to build. The secret to thinking like him is understanding that there is no secret, only process. It's having the courage to be a beginner, the humility to admit you don't know, and the persistence of a detective who doesn't give up on a clue. It's about falling in love with the problem, not the solution. It's about the pleasure of the journey, not the glory of the destination. Transfer ownership of this idea to yourself. You are not limited by your innate intelligence. You are limited only by your belief in this paralyzing idea. Feynman left us a map, not to a hidden treasure of genius, but to the process of digging. He gave us a final quote that serves as the perfect motto for this journey. He taught us to seek that feeling of discovery. There is nothing that science does that is not finding things. It is the pleasure of finding, the aha. Seek that feeling. Ultimately, Feynman's life is not the story of a genius, but the story of a man who mastered the art of learning and discovery. He taught us that questions are often more important than answers, that play is a serious form of work, and that curiosity is the most powerful of intellectual tools. By rejecting the label of genius, he wasn't being falsely modest. He was giving us a much greater gift, permission to be extraordinary through effort and passion. He was showing us that the path to the stars is not through genetic gift, but through persistence, play, and the joy of finding things. And that is a far more inspiring and useful truth than any myth about magical brains.